For the last several months, these two devices have basically owned the dual screen handheld conversation. The AYN Thor and the AYANEO Pocket DS are two of the most interesting handhelds we've seen in a long time, because they're both trying to solve the same problem, but they're going about it in completely different ways. Because on paper, both of these devices are dual screen Android handhelds, but once you actually start using them, it becomes pretty clear that they're not trying to be the exact same device. So today we're comparing the AYANEO Pocket DS against the AYN Thor, not just as emulation devices, but as real handhelds you might actually spend your money on. And by the end, we're going to answer the question, did the Thor actually beat the Pocket DS, or did we just fall for the AYN hype? So instead of saying which one I personally like more right off the bat, I want to walk through the real differences first: the hardware, the screens, the controls, the software, the actual dual screen experience, and then the option people keep forgetting about entirely. So what better place to start than with the hardware? And this is where the first major differences become obvious immediately. The Pocket DS is bigger and thicker than the Thor. At first, that might sound like a negative, and for some people it will be, but the size difference is not random. A lot of the extra thickness comes from the screen setup and the ergonomics, which we'll get into in a second. But before we talk about what the Pocket DS does well, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. The bottom display on the Pocket DS is an LCD panel, and because of the way AYANEO constructed the device, it suffers from some pretty noticeable screen bleed. What that means is when you have darker images on the bottom display, you can see areas where the backlight shines through. And once you notice it, you notice it. Now, to be completely fair, this doesn't ruin the device every second you're using it. If you're playing something colorful or this bottom screen is mostly bright, it becomes much less noticeable. You actually can't see it at all. But every once in a while, a dark menu pops up, a black loading screen appears, or the game shifts to a darker scene, and the device reminds you that the bottom screen is not the same level as the rest of the hardware. That's frustrating, because in a lot of ways, the Pocket DS has a very strong argument. The big advantage of the Pocket DS, in my opinion, is the screen combination. You get a proper 16:9 display on top, and the bottom display is a traditional 4:3 style layout, which is extremely useful for retro gaming. No, you're not getting perfect resolution scaling in every situation, but the flexibility here is genuinely useful. This alone was one of the biggest reasons the Pocket DS made sense to me. It's not just copying the DS or the 3DS, it's giving you a screen layout that feels flexible across multiple types of games. The Thor, on the other hand, is different. The Thor doesn't give you the same screen size or the same 4:3 style bottom display, but what it did give you are dual AMOLED panels. And visually, that matters a lot. The colors, the contrast, the blacks, the overall image quality, the Thor just looks fantastic. If you care more about display quality than screen size, the Thor makes a very strong first impression. It also gives you a more compact dual screen setup, especially if you prefer playing handheld or retro games on a smaller, more squared off display. So right away, the screen comparison comes down to a very real trade-off. The Pocket DS gives you more size and a more flexible layout. The Thor gives you better display quality across both panels. And that difference carries over into the way these devices feel in the hand. The added thickness of the Pocket DS is not just empty space. AYANEO used that extra size to give the device more pronounced grips on the back. You get these grooved humps that make the device a little easier to hold, and the soft touch plastics feel really nice in the hand. It gives the Pocket DS a more premium, more intentional feel. AYANEO also went with a metal lid, which helps the device feel a little bit more upscale overall. From a material standpoint, the Pocket DS does a really good job of feeling like a premium handheld. The Thor, on the other hand, is much flatter on the back. It's actually completely flat. It uses the same type of plastic construction you would expect from a lot of AYN devices. And to be clear, that doesn't mean the device feels cheap, because it doesn't. AYN generally does a really good job with this kind of build. But the Thor feels more like a lightweight gaming handheld. The Pocket DS feels more like a premium clamshell device. Now let's talk about the hinge, because this is another place where both AYN and AYANEO made very different choices. The Thor opens up more easily, and it has these defined stopping points that feel pretty tactile. So far, those positions have held up well in my experience. You can clearly feel where the device wants to sit. The Pocket DS has a much stiffer hinge. Instead of clicking into an obvious position, it gives you more freedom to choose what angle you want the display to be at. That can be really nice, especially if you're trying to dial in the perfect position for dual screen gaming. As far as longevity goes, I wish I could speak more confidently, but at this point, I have not seen enough long-term failures from either device to say one hinge design is clearly more durable than the other. So for now, I would describe it like this. The Thor's hinge feels easier and more deliberate. The Pocket DS hinge feels stiffer and more adjustable. Neither one has given me major concern yet, but they definitely feel different. Now, let's move on to the controls. Both devices use a very similar general layout because honestly, there are only so many ways you can design a clamshell handheld with two screens. That means both devices have stacked analog sticks and buttons. And I'll just say it, this isn't my favorite layout for every type of game. If you play more D-pad centric games or games that require the use of both analog sticks, this kind of layout can feel compromised. It's just one of the trade-offs that comes with making a dual screen clamshell handheld. But the real difference isn't the layout, it's the feel. The Pocket DS has shallower buttons with a clickier response. The Thor has buttons with more travel and they feel more like they have a membrane underneath. If you like short, clicky inputs, the Pocket DS may feel better for you. If you prefer a soft press with more travel, the Thor may feel more comfortable. Moving along to the bumpers and triggers, they're both solid on these devices. But when it comes to the actual trigger design, I have to give the advantage clearly to AYANEO. The Pocket DS triggers give you more surface area and they have a nice curvature that lets your finger wrap around them more naturally. The Thor triggers, well, they're smaller and feel more like a shelf. They work, but they don't feel as comfortable to me, especially if you're playing games that use the triggers heavily. The Pocket DS also gives you 2 extra buttons next to the bumpers, which is a nice addition. Depending on how you map your controls, those can genuinely be useful. But where the Pocket DS starts to fall off for me is in the thumbsticks. And this surprised me because in a lot of areas, I think AYANEO made thoughtful design choices. Unlike the 3DS, which uses a disc style analog control, both AYN and AYANEO decided to use traditional analog sticks that are recessed into the lower half of the device. The problem is that on the Pocket DS, the openings for the sticks are larger and deeper than they are on the Thor. So when you use the analog sticks, it can feel like you're digging your thumb down into a hole. Now, before some of you weirdos come for me, I'm not saying that this is unusable. It does create this weird disconnect where the rest of the device feels premium, with the exception of the bottom screen, but the stick experience feels less refined. The stick caps themselves also favor the Thor. AYN killed it with these rubberized textured caps that feel better under your thumbs. The Pocket DS caps on the other side are smaller and smoother, and for me, they just don't inspire the same confidence. To this point, we've covered most of the exterior on both of these handhelds. I'm not going to spend too much time on every single menu button, volume button, start, select, all that good stuff. Just know that AYN gives you a fairly simple layout, and AYANEO's layout is a little different, but it's not difficult to get used to. The bigger and the more important difference is in the software experience. When you boot up the Pocket DS, you're greeted with IO Home right out of the box. Now, it is worth mentioning that if you don't like IO Home, you can go ahead and turn that off and go back to like a more factory looking Android experience. But right now, we're just going to discuss what the AYANEO Pocket DS has that the Thor doesn't, which is IO Home. And honestly, it's pretty neat. It's essentially AYANEO's custom launcher that gives you a dock-style interface where you can swipe left and right through your apps, then scroll up to access the rest of your app library. It feels more customized for this kind of device, which does make the Pocket DS feel more like a purpose-built dual screen handheld instead of just an Android device with two displays attached to it. The Thor is a little bit more straightforward. You basically get a more stock Android-like experience. The top screen acts as your main display where you can swipe between customizable pages, and swiping up gives you access to the app drawer. The bottom screen acts more independently, almost like its own app drawer that you can still scroll through. Now, when it comes to launching apps, both of the devices make things pretty simple. You navigate the app drawer on either display, and the app opens on the display you launched it from. But it becomes really important once you start dealing with dual screen emulators, because the reality is Android was not originally designed around handhelds like this. To make these devices work, the system internally treats one screen as the main display and the other as more of an external display. And that can affect how dual screen emulators behave. Based on my experience on the Thor, the top display seems to function more as the main display. On the Pocket DS, the bottom display seems to function more like the main display. What I'm trying to say here is that if you want DS or 3DS games to open properly across both screens, you need to make sure you launch the app from the correct display and configure the layout properly inside of the emulator. Now, this isn't rocket science. There are plenty of guides that can walk you through setting these apps up. But once you understand how the device behaves, you can basically just work around it. But it's something you need to know going in. If you're already familiar with the retro handheld space, spending some time in the settings is par for the course. And for dual screen devices, it's no different, just an extra step. Now, when we talk about true dual screen handhelds, the Thor and the Pocket DS are clearly two of the top contenders. But there is another option that a lot of people tend to overlook. And honestly, it might be the most practical option for a lot of people in this space. And that's the Retroid dual screen attachment. I know, before some of you guys start crying, I know this sounds less exciting than a dual screen handheld, but hear me out. If you already have a device like a RP5, RP6, or even something like the AYN 3, this attachment makes a lot of sense. Because realistically, the biggest advantage the Thor and the Pocket DS have is that the second screen is built into the device. That's clean, that's convenient, that's definitely the more elegant solution. But unless you plan on using both screens all the time, you may end up using these devices as single screen handhelds more often than you expect. And that's where the Retroid attachment becomes really interesting. It gives you the flexibility of adding a second screen when you actually want one and removing it when you don't. Now, this type of flexibility is a little hard to ignore, but there are some downsides here. The attachment requires its own cable, so it definitely feels clunkier than having a built-in second display. And depending on the device you attach it to, the clamp can actually block certain buttons. On the AYN 3, for example, you lose access to easy things like your volume buttons, which are now under the clamp. You also don't get the same kind of independent volume and brightness control that you get out of the Thor and Pocket DS. In this case, the brightness control on the Retroid dual screen attachment is on the display itself. And then you still have to go through the menus to change the brightness on the bottom. So it's not super clean. It might not be the most elegant option, and it doesn't give you the same premium clamshell experience. But for around 70 bucks, if your main goal is to occasionally dabble in some DS and 3DS games, or you just want to experiment with a second screen, this becomes a no-brainer. So where do I stand with this dual screen battle? If you guys have seen me on the Save State podcast, you'll know that I'm not the biggest fan of the Pocket DS. But after taking time to really test these two out, I've come to the conclusion that the real problem isn't with the Pocket DS, it's AYANEO, with some sprinkled nitpicks on top. I absolutely hate the recessed thumbsticks on the Pocket DS. Add to that the occasional glimpse of screen bleed, that really just pulls me out of the experience altogether. I honestly think that AYN nailed it with the Thor. In those two departments alone, the thumbstick caps are nice, they're recessed just enough to close the lid, and the dual OLED screens look amazing. Not to mention the price. A base model AYN Thor compared to the exact same 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage in the Pocket DS, it's almost half the price. You can get a completely maxed out AYN Thor with 16GB of RAM, 1TB of storage, and it's still cheaper than the base model Pocket DS. Which leads me to my issue with AYANEO. If I'm going to pay premium prices for a product, it needs to be a completely premium experience. Spending 600 bucks including shipping of the device shouldn't come with things like screen bleed and cheap feeling analog sticks. Sure, the Pocket DS has a metal lid, soft touch plastics. That's awesome. However, a potentially compromised experience negates all the premium materials in the world. The Pocket DS at about maybe 400 bucks would be pretty good, especially if you know what you're getting into and you can live with some of those compromises. So to answer the question, was the AYN Thor's hype justified? Yes. Absolutely. AYN gave us a functional device where the biggest complaint I can think of is the terrible triggers. Which, if I'm honest, I just avoid playing anything that requires the use of those triggers regularly. Alright guys, so let's just wrap this up real quick. Here's my honest take on what you should get. If you have Pocket DS money, let's just say you're eyeballing the 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. I think that roughly comes in at around 570 bucks. And you really want to play dual screen games, this is my honest recommendation. Get yourself a Pro or Max model Thor with a 512, maybe a 1TB SSD, and you're good. Still cheaper than the base model Thor with that recommendation. If you want more flexibility, more power, and then you occasionally want to play some dual screen games, get a Max Odin 3. The dual screen attachment from Retroid and an SD card, and you'll still be under or just about the same price as the base model Pocket DS. The only real reason to get a Pocket DS is if you want those bigger screens that badly to pay that much. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I did my best not to trash the Pocket DS in this video, but thanks to AYANEO, I really think it's a terrible option compared to almost anything else out in the market right now, especially at that price point. But that's just my opinion, which is why I want to know what you guys think. If you're considering getting one, let us know which one down in the comments below and why. If you have one or both, I want to know your thoughts and what's your preference, so people can get different perspectives. I mean, especially if you're one of these weirdos who got a Pocket DS. Yes, I'm in that same group. I really want to know why you decided it was worth that money. But that's it for me today, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more honest, that's right, honest takes. And I'll see you guys in the next one.